Hello, opera lovers of all ages. This is Stephanie Ruozzo with the Cleveland Opera Theater. Welcome to Opera 101, and I am Stephanie Ruozzo. I'm an Education and Outreach Associate with the Cleveland Opera Theater, and we want all of you here for all the days. So please, if you have any questions at any time, please do drop them in the comment box, and I'll be glad to chat with you in real time. Or please do email me any question you might want to discuss at sruzzo@clevelandoperatheater.org. That's SRUOZZO at clevelandoperatheater.org. And we're going to get you any bit of information that you could possibly be interested in. We want to hear from you, and we love chatting with you. So, thank you for joining me today. We do want to talk about Verdi and Shakespeare this week. So, we're wrapping up Verdi month by talking about his different Shakespearean adaptations. And Megan gave us a brief overview of all three of the adaptations yesterday. And today I want to talk about how deeply entrenched that Shakespearean drama was during Verdi's life, in Verdi's life directly, and in the larger romantic consciousness. Why was a bard from the 1600s still so relevant and so popular in the 1800s? What was going on there? Well, the first reason that Shakespeare was so relevant is because his plays were so inundated with music. Music was a huge part of his plays, and we might not think of it that way today. We might think of it as purely acting and speaking the lines, and a completely not musical effort. But from the very beginning of Shakespeare's career, music played a huge role in dramaturgy. So his characters are constantly talking about music and its powers. Think of Prospero in The Tempest with, music's power to enchant. Think of Lorenzo in The Merchant of Venice when he's talking about the measure of a person's character via their response to music. So not only are Shakespeare's characters talking about music constantly, Shakespeare himself would insert songs throughout the drama quite regularly. Either songs that everybody already knew and would have been able to sing along with, as they usually would, because it was a very interactive art form, or he would take a popular tune that the audience would recognize the music for and then set his own new lyrics to it, something that would further the drama in some way, something that would have an effect on Shakespeare's story. So the music served dramaturgical functions as well as aesthetic functions of enjoyment throughout Shakespeare plays. And instruments, not even just sung music, but instrumental music, could signify specific topics like war, fear, love, or any other affect Shakespeare wanted to evoke. And so, from the very beginning of Shakespeare's career, music played a huge role in dramaturgy. So, it's not a surprise that musicians would have picked up on and engaged with music through the Romantic era. But like I said, in the Romantic era, we see this resurgence of Shakespeare. We see Shakespeare overpowering and overshadowing all of art music in general. And this kind of starts with Beethoven's Tempest Sonata, so a piano work, and the Shakespearean influence on that is kind of a topic of debate, but he wrote to a friend of his that you have to read Shakespeare's Tempest to understand his Tempest Sonata. And the first movement is directly a storm, and Beethoven's audiences would have heard it as a storm. So, from the moment of Beethoven, Romantic composers are clearly riffing on Shakespeare's drama. We see it again with Mendelssohn in the Midsummer Night's Dream overture. So, or an orchestral work, no vocals, but he's bringing the forest creatures to life through instrumentation. Tchaikovsky and Prokofiev, so two Russian composers as well, are both composing Romeo and Juliet overtures in different eras. So, again, Shakespeare is overshadowing art music in the Romantic era. Why Verdi's obsession, though? Why Verdi specifically? And we know that Verdi did have a really great love of Shakespeare because he said, I prefer Shakespeare to all the playwrights, including the Greeks. What he means by that is he's appreciating Shakespearean drama even higher and placing it on a pedestal higher than even, Aristotle's Poetics or Sophocles and Aeschylus. So those ancient Greeks whose drama defined good art, good theater for not centuries but millennia, Verdi is actually saying, man, Shakespeare even does it better than them. Well, Verdi had this love of Shakespeare. First of all, because it afforded Verdi the opportunity for formal experimentation. We talked a few times about Verdi's experimentation and kind of trying to break down the barriers imposed by this traditional romantic aria or scene structure of slow part, fast part. And Verdi wanted to go beyond that slow fast dichotomy. He wanted to do something more original, more varied. And Shakespeare's plots allowed him to do that because the complexity of the plot was able to sustain these complex musical shifts from affect to affect and breaking apart the form that other bel canto composers were used to. And Verdi himself usually framed this formal experimentation as a way of maintaining audiences' attention. He believed and stated on multiple occasions that if things are too standardized, the audience is going to lose interest. And if the plot isn't sufficiently meaty, isn't sufficiently complicated and yet somehow relatable, then the audiences are going to lose interest. So the complexity of the plot and the complexity of the form were intertwined for Verdi and for Verdi's listeners. Another reason that Verdi had an abiding love of Shakespeare at his core was the grand scope of these works. Again, talking about complex storylines and complex characters. Remember again last week we mentioned that Verdi was trying to have bigger casts, bigger choruses, bigger orchestras, and he needed these well-constructed stories to hang all of this grandiosity on. He needed Shakespearean plot development, character development to justify the immensity of his works in every way. Another reason Verdi kind of went with the Shakespeare thing was his publisher, Giulio Ricordi. And Megan mentioned Ricordi yesterday, but Ricordi was a huge influence as Verdi's publisher. He pretty much, had control over what material went out to people and how. So Ricordi was constantly hounding Verdi to produce more works, to produce bigger works, and Shakespeare was the bait that Ricordi dangled in front of Verdi. And Ricordi knew that if he wanted to get Verdi to compose something, he'd have to push the Shakespeare button. This also was a shared obsession with Verdi's last librettist, Arrigo Boito. And again, Ricordi used this association with Boito to lure Verdi out of that interregnum, that 16-year period of no new operas that we've been talking about. And Verdi and Boito had this mercurial relationship, kind of partly adversary, but really respectful in a way. So Boito was also a composer, and there was this love-hate rivalry between the older Verdi and the younger Boito, who was kind of this, upstart youngster who was trying to represent a new generation. And again, mutual respect, but rivalry between the two. And Boito loved Shakespeare. So when Boito wanted to claim Shakespeare, Verdi said, well, I'm having none of that. I'm going to take Shakespeare because I can do it better. And I'm Verdi, so of course I will. And Verdi nearly dropped Boito as his librettist over the issue of who would get to set Shakespeare to music. In 1884, they had kind of a very public tiff over who was going to get to set the latest Shakespeare opera. And Verdi said, no, doggone it, it's going to be me. And Verdi won, because he's Verdi. And just, again, the larger cultural consciousness of Shakespeare in the Romantic era. Verdi got swept up as a man of his times in a larger cultural obsession and use of Shakespeare. So Became adopted in Romantic operas, beginning in Germany, with actually several different Tempest adaptations. And this was during a larger era of defining German Romanticism and nationalism. Then Shakespeare kind of spread to France and became a big thing during a time of modernization, when France was looking to establish their own genre of grand opera. And so Verdi was largely participating in these cultural streams of thought. So his love of Shakespeare was not only a personal thing, but um, a temporal thing. Shakespeare was a through line in Verdi's whole career, and we see it pop up at several points. He started working on Macbeth in 1847, just a few years after the death of his two small children and wife Margarita. And he really, at that period, started to connect with the darkness of Shakespeare in a way that he hadn't connected with any other playwright or librettist or poet. And he even said, when he was going through this inner turmoil and reacting to the tragedies in his own life, as he drew closer to Macbeth, he found a love for the tragedy and complexity. And he said, quote, "I don't want Lady Macbeth to sing at all. Lady Macbeth's voice should be hard, stifled, and dark. Eugenia Tadolini, the actress who was singing the first Lady Macbeth, Eugenia Tadolini's voice is angelic. I want Lady Macbeth's to be diabolic," end quote. So Verdi, at that point in his life, started fostering this love of Shakespeare that would carry throughout the next several decades of his life. He made several futile attempts at King Lear. That was kind of the opera that just stumped him and he could not complete. But he, doggone it, he kept trying over and over to get that King Lear in the books. But finally, we see a breakthrough with Otello in 1887. And again, with Shakespeare, Verdi starts to exercise a little freedom in adapting the source material. So he's, again, associating himself with Shakespeare. He's kind of looking at Shakespeare as a kindred spirit, and looking at their work as more of a collaboration rather than an adaptation. So, for instance, Verdi changes Iago's moral alignment from, something like a chaotic evil to a lawful evil, where Iago suddenly, in Shakespeare's work, started out as the I just want to cause trouble for trouble's sake. And in Verdi's opera, Iago takes on this persona of, I am the righteous evildoer, kind of. I'm going to punish you all and exercise a kind of sadistic worldview for the sake of doing justice. And Verdi, through this adaptation in the libretto, takes on the role of Shakespeare's equal, kindred spirit, rather than simply a mouthpiece for another artist, for Shakespeare. And we see the culmination of this with Falstaff, his last opera in 1893. Verdi at this point has abandoned the bel canto forms, that, again, slow fast dichotomy, that were prominent during his early career and somewhat still there in the middle period. He's abandoned the distinction between Henry IV and the Merry Wives of Windsor. So Falstaff becomes more of a character study than Shakespeare's original works did. And because Falstaff represents such a strong break with the past at this point, Georges Bizet, the Carmen guy, that one, he even said, quote, "Verdi is no longer Italian, he is following Wagner," end quote. Now, those are fighting words, and Verdi would be very angry should he be confronted with them, because, like I mentioned last time, if you accuse Verdi of copying Wagner, his ghost will come back and haunt you, fair warning. But it does go to show just how radical the changes were allowed by Shakespearean adaptations. So Verdi used Shakespeare to revolutionize Italian Romantic opera, and we have kind of Shakespeare and Verdi to thank for the operas that we know and love today and the progression of the art form. So if there are any other questions on that, I'd like to please do give a shout out for a last round of questions if you want to pop them in the comment box. And other than that, I do want to encourage you to visit clevelandoperatheater.org to get all of the details on our upcoming events, like our summer concert series. We've got concerts coming up in July and August that you can join us for. All the details are on clevelandoperatheater.org. And check out our Facebook. Well, obviously, you've seen our Facebook page. Please do like it so that you can keep up with all our notifications. And please do join us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We're having a bunch of fun on all of those platforms, and we're sharing different content to each of those platforms. That being said, a heads up, we are going to be shifting Opera 101 from Facebook Live to a YouTube broadcast. We're going to be sharing links. We're going to be sharing more info on how to access that. But within the next few days, next week will be our YouTube premiere. So please do keep up with us on that and check in with us. And we'd love to hear from you at any time. Thanks, guys. Bye.